let's talk a little bit about some news that caught my eye today. Seems like I've been talking a lot about Japanese game companies. And today is no different. I'm going to be talking about Square Enix. Today they announced that Final Fantasy VII, the remake, will be fully voiced, which at first I was like, oh man, that's awesome. But then I got thinking about it. And this has some implications that I hadn't really thought about, especially for the release date. So let's think about this. If you haven't played Final Fantasy VII, and if you haven't, you should, go back and play the original because it's going to be really good. It's a great game and it holds up. The graphics look awful later on, but the gameplay holds up without a doubt. But when you play through that game, I mean, I recently did, and while the dialogue worked at the time that it came out, it reminded me of a Harrison Ford quote. You see, here I am being felicitous. He said, "You could type this shit, but you can't say it." He was referring to George Lucas writing stuff about Star Wars. He didn't think the dialogue in that in those movies were really up to snuff, and that's how I felt when I was playing Final Fantasy VII again. The dialogue just really wasn't all that great. And if they're going to be fully voicing it, they're really going to need to redo a lot of the dialogue. And seriously, go through and play the game. Read the dialogue out loud. Some of it is pretty terrible. Now, this might not be the fault of Square. I mean, I don't know whose fault it is that the dialogue isn't very good for Final Fantasy VII, but it could be like a localization problem. Maybe in Japanese, this stuff is like fantastically written, but the localization is so expensive for games like this because they have mountains and mountains of text to go through that it just takes a really long time. And ideas that they can easily communicate in on one screen with very few Japanese characters. When you convert that over to English and it's like you have to keep hitting the button to go through it, I can see why maybe localization looks at the general idea of what was said, and instead of doing a direct translation, just kind of sums it up in English. So I'm not sure why, but perhaps whoever was in charge of localization just didn't have enough time to do it. And that made the dialogue in Final Fantasy VII really, really weak. First questions that come to mind. Well, let's get this joke out of the way. Is that, are they going to get Mr. T to play Barret? Because that's how I read him. When I played the original, I read him as if Mr. T was saying his words. In fact, in my mind, that's what Barret sounds like. He sounds like Mr. T. Shut up, fool! You know, like that. That's how he sounded to me. And it always kind of endeared Barret to me because it just made everything he said kind of comical, even when it seemed like he wasn't trying to be comical. So that's the kind of thing they're definitely going to have to rework, because the current way that the text is set up is just not going to work. Now, there is a localization out there. I forget what it's called. I tried installing it like a couple weeks ago. Somebody went through, I think it's called the Because localization, but somebody went through, like a group. They went through and they translated everything from the Japanese to be very true to form, because I guess that the version that we got here in the US was not very true to form. And I wanted to check that out, but I couldn't figure out how to get it installed right. It wasn't user friendly, and I just didn't have time to mess with it, so I gave up. Don't be a quitter like me. If you can figure it out, I bet you can find it. I think it's called the Because mod for Final Fantasy VII. And I have the Steam version, which I think was causing me to have some issues, but I'm not positive. So the original text, like I said, is really sparse. If they're going to completely voice act the entire thing, how much more time is going to be added to the development by fully voicing the game. I mean, first off, they're going to have to expand on anything that they put out there. And it's not just a dialogue choice now. Now you've got to have an actor in there reading the stuff and making sure that they get it over and over until it sounds right when a conversation comes up and you're given the choice between two dialogue options. You want them both to sound right when you choose them. So this might add quite a bit of time to the development of this game. And that's just for the Japanese version of the game. Even after that gets put out, they're also, if they're going to do this the way that I assume that they will, is they're also going to have to localize the voice acting. So not only do they have to do it in Japanese, but now they're going to have to hire American voice actors. Well, not necessarily American, but English-speaking voice actors in order to translate this game for overseas. That's going to add a lot more time. So we'll probably look at this game come out in Japan first, and then other territories later. And that's just for English. They'll also probably have to have somebody for European release. They'll probably have a few different languages there. It's going to be quite the undertaking. Now, when I read this, I also thought a little bit about Bravely Default. Bravely Default is a fantastic game. A lot of people say this is what, at least I think Bravely Default is the game that I'm talking about. But a lot of people say that Bravely Default is what Final Fantasy should have become had it continued, or the way that it continued, because a lot of people weren't happy with the way that Final Fantasy continued. Although I played Final Fantasy 13 and I really enjoyed it. Although I didn't beat it because my Xbox broke. Back a couple of years ago, and then I just couldn't make myself go through that 50-hour tutorial again to get to the good part of the game. But that's beside the point. But Bravely Default, the voice acting in that game for the American version felt really incredibly corny, and I really didn't enjoy playing it with that. So I tried playing it a couple different ways. One way was I ended up turning it completely off and just reading it. But then I felt like I was missing something. So rather than have it completely off, I switched it over to Japanese voice and, of course, American subtitles, or I'm sorry, English subtitles. I sound like an idiot when I do that. But English subtitles, and the Japanese voice acting sounded really cool. That partially could be because I don't speak Japanese, so I wasn't sure exactly if it was reading the same way that I was reading it, but it sounded good, and I thought that the voice actors and the Japanese voice actors did a really good job. I just felt like they sounded better because the American or the English speaking voice acting fell flat, or it just felt cheesy to me. I hope that Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't fall into the same trap. I really hope that they get talented voiceover actors to do the voices in their game, since they are going to be voice acting the entire game, or at least do what they did in Bravely Default and give me the option to switch it over to Japanese so I don't have to hear the horrible acting, or that I can't identify the horrible acting because I can't speak Japanese. I like it when I'm given options like that. Of course, before I was joking about the Mr. T thing, from what I've read, it seems like the voice actors from Final Fantasy Advent Children are going to be reprising their roles, which is interesting. I don't remember that particularly well. I don't remember if it was good or not. But if they weren't good, I don't think that they would probably be bringing them back. I think that they were generally well received. But also, when I read this, and they didn't specify, but are they referring to the Japanese actors reprising their roles, or the English-speaking actors reprising their roles? That's the question. Or were they referring to both? And they also said that they have yet to decide who is going to play the roles that were not included in Advent Children. So I guess some of the characters, and I can't remember because it was a long time ago for Advent Children, but some of the characters from Final Fantasy VII were not included in Advent Children, and so they don't already have established voices. So they're going to be making new casting for those characters. Again, I don't know if that's English or Japanese or both. I hope that they do a really good job with this, because Final Fantasy VII is the game that got me into JRPGs. Before that one, when I was younger and I was trying to play games like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, I just found them... I didn't quite understand what was happening, and I always had it borrowed from somebody, or maybe I rented it from the store, so I didn't have enough time with it to really get what those games were trying to bring across. I guess I would also say I just wasn't mature enough to appreciate the game without the graphics. That's changed now because, after playing Final Fantasy VII, I went back and played other JRPGs and really, really enjoyed them. But Final Fantasy VII will always kind of have a special place for me in my heart because of that experience of this was my first JRPG, and I really enjoyed the experience, even though I never beat it because I couldn't beat the last guy. I didn't grind enough. That's also something that I'm curious about is JRPGs, while I do love the style of play, I don't like the grindiness of them sometimes, and it would be really nice if they did a more Western-style level progression system in the game, where whatever level you are, as you play through, if you get to... Maybe I'm level 10 when I get to boss 4 in the game, and I'm just making stuff up here. So I get to the 4th boss in the game, and my character's level 10. The game automatically adjusts that boss to be level 10. If I'm level 50 when I get to the final boss of the game, and if you haven't played it, I'm certainly not going to spoil it for you. If I'm level 50 at that point, then that boss is level 50, so it takes the grinding out of the game, because that was the part that I always didn't really like. I hope that that's true, but I doubt that that'll be true. And that's just me spitballing a little bit. Let's switch hemispheres and talk about a game that it's a Western game, and it's Batman Arkham Knight. So we're switching gears just a little bit. Apparently, the final DLC, which is called, oh gosh, I forgot what it's called. Season of Infamy, I guess, is what it's called. The final DLC is going to be about an hour in length. So basically, they've put out a few DLCs, but most of them have been, I'd say, lots of skins and a few short missions. And this is supposed to be the final DLC for the season pass. So if you spent $40 on the season pass, apparently what is reported that people are saying is you basically got a bunch of skins in about 4 hours for content. I don't like to equate dollars per hour of gameplay, but it really feels like Rocksteady is phoning it in with this. Now, there's a couple of explanations that are possible here, and number one, the number one thing here is I blame the people who bought the DLC, the season pass ahead of time. It's your fault. And a lot of people don't want to hear that, but if you bought the season pass ahead of time, you bought it without knowing what you were going to get. It's your fault. All right. Caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. I think I got that right. It's been a long time since I read about that stuff. But let the buyer beware. This is why it's bad to buy things before you know about them. You wouldn't go to a car dealership and buy a car without knowing the mileage of the car. You wouldn't buy a house without looking in it first. Why are you guys buying video games without finding out more about it first? You gotta stop giving them your money up front. Rocksteady already had your money. They don't have to try and earn it anymore. Now, I say Rocksteady, but I know that those guys make really good games. And I also don't want to say that those developers don't care, because I really think that if you are a developer, you are getting into this system, this what's the word I'm looking for? This business. You're getting into this business because you love games and you want to make good games. I don't think anybody gets into that business to make crappy games. Okay? But who does? I think publishers do. And it's not that they intentionally want to make a crappy game. They're not twirling their mustache over there at Rocksteady. Basically, what I think is going on is they've said, all right, we've sunk this much money into it. We're getting this much out. If we put any more time or money into it, we are going to be hurting our bottom line. And our job as a publisher is to make as much money as possible for our stockholders. If we don't do that, then we're not doing our job. And they cannot be faulted for that. So this all comes down to the player. The player has got to wait and make these companies earn their money. Make them make something awesome and then give them money for it. If they make something not awesome, don't give them money, and they'll stop making things that are not awesome. That's really all there is to it. Now, let's think about the issues that Batman Arkham Knight has had so far since its release. It had, and you can go back and listen to some old episodes, but Batman Arkham Knight has had some serious problems this year, especially with the PC version of the game. So here's what I'm thinking actually happened. Like I said, I don't think that the suits are twirling their mustaches over there. All right. They probably said this is due to problems with the PC version of the game. Remember, it got pulled from Steam. People were returning the digital version of the game. This was the first time that this was ever allowed to happen because the PC port was so bad. So remember, once they put that out, Rocksteady said, listen, I forget who they hired to do the port, but apparently it was like a really small team, and I guess Rocksteady had to shuffle some people over to help them. So they're shuffling around staff to help fix all of the problems with the PC port, and maybe they just didn't have the manpower needed in order to make the Season Pass DLC the way that they wanted to. Now, if that's the case, or if they've got a mustache twirling suit over there, either way, it feels like, to me, Batman Arkham games are now pretty well tarnished in my mind. And I'm sure that lots of people had loads of fun with it on the console. And I have talked to people who have played it on the PC, and they had exactly the right hardware that made the game work just fine on their system. I have not played it because of all the problems, and I don't have one of the newer consoles. I'm a PC guy. So I have not played Batman. I don't know who that is, but I have not played Batman Arkham Knight. So I don't know. But all I do know is that it got really bad reviews on the PC because it was a poor port. Rocksteady had to shuffle some people around, and I think that maybe that's what's causing the DLC to be, I'll say, less than optimal. I don't know that I'd take a PC port from Rocksteady seriously at this point. Well, anyway, those are my thoughts about gaming for today. Thanks for listening, and I will see you guys next time.